Alright then, so I found chapter 4, which means this is going to be a half episode to basically go over the story. The last book of Fay Willows' escapades. Go to all options first here. Slow those down a little bit. Yeah, it's fine. Make them multiples of 5. Or not. That's still a little bit loud. Alright, well. Shonen lore. We'll go down to Fay Willows' escapades. And, you know, I really have to say, I'm kind of surprised that even though they basically add all the lore in, they didn't actually add in any, you know, achievement for like getting all the lore here. Because this is a lot of lore to pick up, but whatever. I'm not really going to fret about that really too much. So, down here is book 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's begin. Truly, there is nothing more horrid than the experience of encountering ghouls. You will likely smell them as they emit a horrible stench. Else, if you are lucky, you'll just hear them as they groan in a low, painful sounding tone. Casting your eyes upon them, you will be presented with a truly horrible display as you witness rows of hanging flesh and dripping pus surrounding a vaguely humanoid figure. The worst of it, though, is the touch and feel of the ghouls. I bet any ordinary individual would feel grossly unsettled just poking them with a stick, let alone engaging up close to them in combat as I did. As I walked along the tree line, I recounted the events that had led me to these daily patrols. 33 long years passed after the cataclysm of the Spellblaze, the moment still burning within my mind, as well as my body. I survived the destruction and the events that followed, and had come to find myself in Elvala among the Shaloran, whom I come to care for and be in care of. I had fallen in love with one of the soldiers whom I trained with and had come to know him as family. Yet I wondered how the rest outside of Elvala suffered, how those forlorn at home fared, and if I should leave to explore the world again as I once desired to. Returning from my patrol towards the old path that cut through the forest, I noticed a couple of Elva's officials and a cadre of guards in the distance. Approaching them, I soon noticed what looked to be a rotting body at their feet. Glancing towards the body, I felt a coldness, a dark force that felt worse than anything I had ever experienced, including the chaotic energies within me. Catching sight of me, one of the officials turned toward me and stated in a direct voice, "Fay, I need you to quickly exit through the shroud, take a quick look around, and report back anything unusual you see." Sensing some urgency to this request, I promptly turned toward the shroud and dove in without a second thought. Traveling through the misty smoke, I recalled the first time I had left Elvala. I had traveled through the magical barrier many times to rescue those who had found themselves stranded outside the wall, or to act as an escort for Nargle emissaries and traders. but I could feel as though there was a great tension around me. For the next 2 hours, I slowly traversed through the smoke, with only my thoughts to keep me company, until at last I reached the other side and began to see the outside world ahead begin to unfurl itself. Nearing the outer edges of the smoke, I heard a guttural sound bellow out nearby, before I glimpsed a gaunt figure jumped over toward me, swinging his arms in my direction. Unable to immediately dodge the attack, one of the arms connected to my chest, hitting me with immense strength. The strike reverberated through my steel breastplate, shaking the whole of my body, and throwing me completely off balance. Seemingly not missing a beat, the creature threw its face towards my arm, clamping down hard with his teeth, and somehow biting through my steel gauntlets. Pain seared through my steel left arm, and something more seemed to course through my body, sapping my strength and making me sluggish. I did not know who this attacker was, but I could feel the hatred inside me begin to build. All that was left to do was to unleash it. Beginning to counterattack, I activated a heat beam rune in my left hand. The creature quickly detached from my arm and began to cry out as flames engulfed all around it. Immediately following this, I began to hit the creature with a fury of blows that quickly overwhelmed the creature as it flailed wildly in an attempt to attack back. Pressing my advantage, I struck the creature with a devastating swipe that cut across its body. I paused for a moment as I expected the creature to keel over dead, but was surprised when the creature seemed to bounce back and try once more to attack me. I dodged this attack with ease though, and with a simple slash I partially separated its head from its body, finally killing it. Finally having a chance to closely examine the creature, I noticed a single eye staring out from one of its eye sockets. Blinking and looking at the rest of its body, I realized I had been fighting a rotting corpse. I wondered if there was any more undead, and I began to look around my immediate area. Around me, I could spot a few sparse dead corpses mingling about that I had yet to notice my presence. Deciding I would dispatch them, I attempted to quietly approach them, only to realize how difficult this would be due to all the muddy ground in the area. It was at this point though, when I wondered why all the ground was muddy, before I discerned the many tracks and footprints all leading into the shroud. Realizing the danger that I was headed to Elvala, I quickly activated the Rune of Return that had been grafted by the ogres on my neck, and in an instant I was once again within the city walls. Before I could reacquire my bearings, a Shaloran soldier walked into me and knocked me to the ground. The soldier soon got to his feet saying, "My apologies," and proceeded to extend a hand under my left shoulder to help me up. Noticing the festering bite marks on my arm, the eyes of the soldier soon gained a solemn look and continued to talk stayed. Command will want to report immediately on the undead you encountered. We've had a few more wander in through the shroud while you were scouting. I turned toward the soldier, who nodded in the direction of the main battlement line, facing towards Elva's northern forest. Nodding back, I proceeded to make my way to the tower above the main gate, where I suspected the watch captain would be. I quickly made my way through the host of gathering soldiers forming below the walls, and made my way up along with the mages and archers who were climbing the stairs to get in their positions. Noticing me as I made my way up, the watch captain called out in my direction, and I hurried over to his position to relate to him what had occurred. The captain tensed his face as I gave him my report, and cursed as he turned his head to look out toward the shroud. Alright, so this first chapter isn't really like, telling you too much, but it's basically like a bunch of undead in the area of like Elvala. And you basically are sort of catching up here of like, what's happened to Fay in like the past like 33 years after like, the Spellblaze. So this basically gives you sort of like a sort of a grounding, like where in like the time basically this like Pacific book is basically taking place in representation to like the world, and you can basically like get like a sort of idea that like basically like Faye is basically like she's not like a bit of like armor on herself, like steel breastplate and steel gauntlets. She basically has like heat beam runes, so she's actually a well-equipped soldier at this point. So she's not like some novice like adventurer at this point. Anyhow, we'll just basically move on to chapter 2, and I believe that's where we basically start to get into like the real gist of what this like story is basically all about. So 5, Chapter 2, Elvala under attack. Looking past the gruesome nature of the undead, I can somewhat appreciate the brilliance of the tactics and strategy that they employed. Everything seemed to have been meticulously planned out beforehand, and being undead, they were able to act perfectly in preordained manner. This allowed the Necromancer controlling them to safely stay out of harm's way and away from the duration of the battle. I probably could have spelled that better, but whatever. Suddenly, I noticed the captain's eyes narrow and lock onto something within the smoke, and turning to look myself, I noticed the curving distortions. Suddenly, with a loud call to fire coming from the watch captain, the many archers and mages began to loose arrows and cast spells, causing disturbance to turn into a whirling maelstrom of projectiles, and magic slammed into it. Despite the barrage, a glistening phalanx of moving bones and tattered armor emerged, revealing several rows of skeletons in a defensive formation. Holding their shields high above them, they moved with lockstep of each other, and slowly made their approach toward the walls. The defenders continued to unleash everything they could over the walls, but for every single skeleton that was shattered or had its bones scattered across the battlefield, it seemed as if 2 or more were emerged behind it. Being unliving enemies with no free will of their own, they continued to advance toward us no matter how many of them fell. Approaching the walls, the soldiers from below began to cart up rocks and stones into great piles, and as the skeletons got closer, the soldiers began to throw the debris over the walls. Unlike with the arrows and spells, the skeletons could not overcome the heavy weight dropping down on them, and many were subsequently crushed. Looking down at them, the captain seemed amused over the situation before muttering, "I don't see them carrying any ladders, but judging from how they marched to the walls, they must have some plan." Continuing to monitor them, I noticed hoarse voices in the air, and all of a sudden nearby panicked voices from those on the wall began to call out that they were under attack. Looking around, I couldn't see any attackers, but I could tell that they were foes nearby. Then all at once, I could feel a faint presence of something moving behind me, and a watch captain. Quickly pulling my air, I slashed behind me in a space where one of them was, and though I couldn't see the enemy, I heard a loud gasp as my weapon slashed through the air. Becoming aware of what was happening, the watch captain called out to the defenders on the battlements, "We are under attack by shades. Defend yourselves." All at once, everyone on the battlements turned to deal with the new threat and ignored the skeletons below. Those that could determine where the hidden enemies were quickly focused their attacks on dispatching the enemies directly, while those that couldn't unleashed attacks in wide arcs that would be difficult to evade. It wasn't long before a torrent of death cries filled the air, but it would soon become clear that these enemies were just a distraction as skeletons made their move, constructing ladders and forming pyramids made of bones. Now, with the means to get to us, the skeletons were clambering up and arriving onto the battlements, using their superior numbers to push us back. Seeing that we were being overwhelmed, the watch captain gave the order to abandon the walls, causing everyone to scramble into an attempt to get off in whatever way possible. Unfortunately, in the confusion, many who were still engaged or injured were unable to get away, and were subsequently hacked to pieces. Having lost control of the battlements, a small force of skeletons moved to take over the gates, and allow for the rest of the undead outside to get in, while the rest of the skeletons began to jump off in pursuit of us in a bid to run us down. As we ran down one of Elva's narrow streets, the watch captain saw an opportunity present itself, and ordered the mages to form a firing line. Following us, the skeletons funneled into the streets after us in tight formation, presenting a perfect opportunity for a barrage of spells to be used against them. Waves of lightning, fire, and cold spells washed over the battlefield and sent their bones scattering all over the street. Seeing most of the skeletons vanquished, the defenders broke into the resounding cheer until realization set in that there were more to come. Looking past the fallen skeletons, we could see a torrent of undead now flooding through the gate. The guttural sounds of ghouls began to fill the air, and along with these ghouls walked another couple legion of skeletons. However, it was behind them that a truly frightening undead began to move. Hulking figures of towering bone that stood as high as many of Elva's buildings. A final line of skeletons also appeared, but unlike the others, they appeared to be armed with staves and bows. Quickly, the undead began to organize themselves, before moving lockstep with each other in our direction. Our mages attempted to raid another set of spells, but quickly found this quite difficult, as arrows and spells from the undead began to rain down on them. Realizing we would have to engage the undead fully, we raised our shields and we proceeded to step forward. As the front lines drew closer, we would be caught off guard when the ghouls made giant leaps over our entire formation. We soon found ourselves boxed in as the ghouls clawed us in the back, while remaining undead forces collided into us from the front. With little room to maneuver, the Shaloran archers and mages behind us were cut down, while the soldiers in front of them could do little more than keep their shields in front of them to block attacks. Panicking, those who could teleport broke from the line, leaving the rest of us to fend off the encroaching undead horde. The situation was looking quite bleak as we found ourselves trapped by the undead, and everything was thrown into complete disarray. Alright, so yes, basically we're getting to like the meat of what the story is basically all about. So I'll note that I believe basically at the time I was basically writing this, I was playing a lot of Heroes of Might and Magic 3 and possibly 2 and 4 and stuff like that. And because that game is all about armies of monsters and men and everything else basically fighting each other, I basically wanted to sort of write a story that's sort of based on that sort of principle in Tales of Maj'Eyal. And the idea here is that basically the the undead of Tales of Maj'Eyal, the ghouls can basically leap over things, the shades can basically pass through walls and fly around and stuff like that, and the skeletons are basically skeletons, and the bone giants are bone giants. And the idea here is that I wanted to basically show off what the tactics might look like for the different forces basically in this game. We know for example with the stories the Spellblaze and Garcool and stuff like that, we have the orcs basically sort of charging the lines and just brutish fashion and stuff like that. And Garcool basically had the pirates of flames and stuff like that burn people, and the giant golems of the halflings and stuff like that. But we didn't really have any idea how the undead basically worked, so I basically chose to make a story about the undead here. And I think I did a fairly good job here because I think I basically incorporated a lot of what the undead are basically all about. So we basically have a tactful Necromancer. He's using basically shades to sort of get behind the walls and stuff like that because they can ignore the walls. He's using ghouls basically to jump over formations of men, so that they're basically sort of they're sort of in a surprise sort of front line that basically they don't have to actually fight basically on the front line. They can basically jump around. So the ghouls are sort of cavalry in this game. If basically want to go for a total war type aspect, and we'll soon basically have the monsters basically come in as well as the bone giants, but that'll be in the next chapter here. So let's get to it, shall we? And we'll go with leadership from the front. As an experienced commander would tell me long after a battle with the undead, the winner of a battle is not necessarily dictated by the amount of enemies slain, but rather by which side breaks first. While the quality of our army's ability to fight is important, it means nothing should its soldiers lose the will to fight. We have been lucky in the defense of Elvala, with the aid from the Ogres, and eventually rallying leadership of Arion. Without them, all hope of victory would have surely been lost. And before I just go on here, this isn't really basically explicitly stated in the game, but is this something that I assume is this a rally of how basically works here? The undead basically don't have morale, which should be in line with all the other games that Heroes of Might and Magic present, for example, where the undead never break basically from low morale and stuff like that, but the living basically do, and that's basically what I sort of want to basically cover here. Where this issue is getting very bleak and people are losing hope and this being cut down, and that's just basically what's happening. So yeah. Alright, so the hatred within me began to build as enemies attacked me from in front and behind. However, I had my own problems to deal with as one of the bone giants, as I would call them, stepped up to clobber me. Managing to somehow avoid the first attack, I focused the chaotic energies within me and unleashed a powerful strike that destroyed a good portion of his lower body. This seemed to be to no avail, though, as the bone giant reorganized and shifted the bones of his body around to form a protective barrier before seemingly beginning to rebuild itself. The bone giant then proceeded to unleash another strike against me that left me stunned and temporarily unable to react. Put on my back foot, matters only got worse when a ghoul approached me from behind and bit deeply into my shoulder. The situation was looking quite hopeless, but from behind I heard a voice yell out of the corner of my eye, and I saw a ghoul careen past me. A flash of frost shot forth and blasted a hole through the ghoul as well as blowing off one of his arms of the bone giant in front of me. Glancing to the side, I noticed a young ogre step up, and I could hear the giant footsteps of stampeding ogres that were hurtling towards the fray. I didn't have much time to observe what was happening around me. However, as the bone giant turned its attention to me and the ogre. Attacking the first ogre, the much bigger bone giant brought down an attack with its other arm, knocking out the ogre away like a ragdoll. Leaving itself open to my side, I lunged to attack the bone giant once again, but this had little effect as I had little strength to cause any damage, and the barrier of bone surrounding the bone giant's body absorbed the entirety of the blow. Responding to my efforts, I was subsequently battered with another powerful attack and sent reeling away. Yet again, though, the ogre would come to my aid, charging into the bulk of the bone giant and knocking it backward away from me before it could make a follow-up attack. Seeing me in my exhausted state, the ogre shouted over his shoulder for me to run, before activating a shielding rune and bracing himself for retaliation that would come. Battered and bruised, I began to move away to recover. After getting some distance away from the skirmish, I turned to survey the battlefield in its entirety. The undead line had been broken significantly by the charging ogres who come to aid us, but a good deal of our defensive line was injured or dead. Many of those Shaloran who had teleported away had now returned to the fight, engaging in small groups on all sides of the undead army, and keeping the undead off balance. However, the line of skeleton archers and mages of the undead force remained largely intact, and were now picking off individual defenders in their unguarded flanks. The scene was one of chaos, and I could not tell if we were winning or losing, but nonetheless I could hear the screams of my fellow defenders dying all around me. It seems that this has turned into quite a battle, a voice came out from behind me. All of a sudden, as those words were being stated, I could feel myself being enveloped in a bright glow as my bruises disappeared and wounds began to heal. Turning to face the voice, I came face to face with an armored Shaloran holding a glowing hand outstretched in my direction. I recognized the armor worn and weapon held as being the same set from the Grand Council chambers. Putting his hand down, the Shaloran continued, "I'm no doctor, but this should be enough to keep you on your feet until the battle's end. Now then, let's see." He paused for a moment as he looked at the battlefield, and then took a deep breath. Then, in a rather surprisingly loud voice for a Shaloran, he yelled, "Defenders! Focus your efforts on crushing the skeleton archers and mages. Leave those hulking bone monstrosities and armored skeletons to me." Before I even had a chance to understand what had been said, the Shaloran tilted himself in front of the ogre that had come to my aid, and in an instant struck the side of the bone giant. All at once, a violent display of colors exploded all around the bone giant that shattered the monstrosity into thousands of pieces all over the street. Not missing a beat, the Shaloran swiftly dove into the next bone giant nearby and brought it down with little effort as well. Seeing this display, I immediately began to regain all my will to fight, and following the order given, I charged forward. However, before I could reach the undead ranged supporters, a couple armored skeletons stepped forward with shields raised to meet me. Looking to break through them, I stepped forward with a heavy strike, only to have my attack deflected and my footing thrown off balance. Seeing an opportunity, one of the skeletons dropped his shield down and prepared to launch a counterattack against me. Before its attack could connect though, a heavy swipe flew over my head, sending a skull sailing away. From behind me, another one of the ogres stepped forward, and together we converged on the other skeleton. After sending bones flying, I nodded to the ogre, and we continued on towards the waiting archers and mages. Along with the other ogres and Shaloran, we dove deep into the enemy ranks, hewing our weapons through their undefended lines. Perhaps realizing that they had no hope of winning, the skeletons turned around and began to move away, seemingly entered into a retreat. Getting ready to pursue them, we were stopped by remaining ghouls who jumped into our way, and remaining bone giants that had not yet been dispatched. While the undead had been weakened enough to no longer be a threat, they would buy enough time for skeleton archers and mages to escape out the gate and into the shroud. Alright, so this is sort of like gives a sort of like overlay of like, you know, the bone giant basically, and like how like fearsome an opponent basically is. And at the same time, basically, it's also showing like how powerful Aaron is, basically in like, you know, comparison to say like, you know, Fay here. So when I was basically writing this basically up here, I figured that like, you know, Fay Willows would be like, you know, maybe like a level 20 or level 30 like type of character in like game. And this would be like comparison to say Aaron, who's like, you know, a level 50 like, you know, Arcane Blade. And the idea here is basically to sort of like, you know, showcase like, you know, this is basically a fierce battle of like, you know, bone giants that like, you know, can easily like crush whoever's basically in front of them. And then Aaron basically comes in and basically like, says like, nope, smash, destroys the bone giant in one shot, so to speak. And yeah, basically this one here is like, you know, it's showing off a little bit more about like, you know, the undead army, but it's also showing off like, you know, basically a power comparison of like, you know, where like, you know, Fay basically stands versus like the undead, and where like, you know, Aaron basically stands versus the undead. So there's that. Alright, so let's move on to chapter 4, but before I do, I'm just gonna quickly blow my nose, so one moment, but you know, gotta take care of myself and stuff, so just gonna do a quick mic test here. So test, yep, it's working. Alright, so, and just to do a quick check, I'm probably actually gonna only do like 4 chapters for like this video, by the way, so we'll basically break this into like 2 different videos, because there is like, you know, 8 chapters, and they're like all the same length as like the other chapters here, since there's 8 as opposed to like 6 here, but whatever. Alright, so confrontation. So here we go. I was oddly able to get back on my feet quite easily after receiving the initial healing spell cast on me. Perhaps even quicker than what was normally possible. This would hold true to the additional healing I received moments after. There is something about the chaotic energy within me that interacts with my body and allows it to mend quicker when with the more hate I feel. This isn't something that I can easily take advantage of, however, and should the hatred within me dissipate before I receive any medical attention, it will result in a long and arduous recovery time. Alright, so this like little like, you know, italicized paragraph basically up here, I want to note this is basically sort of like, you know, corresponding to like, you know, the cursed and like how their healing basically works. So for those who never actually played with the cursed class, the cursed basically are sort of like, you know, character class that has like, you know, these like unnatural bodies that they basically like, you know, actually have like this sort of like detrimental talent that like, you know, makes it so they actually have like, you know, I guess like half healing, half like a healing malice basically on their bodies at like low hate. But as they actually build up hatred, they actually get to be able to heal a lot like, you know, faster and stuff like that. So this is actually like a good like, you know, showing of like, you know, how Fay's like, you know, hatred here. It's both like a double-edged sword, because like, you know, when she's basically in combat she heals very easily, but if she's basically like, you know, out of combat it takes a long time for her to heal. So you know, it's kind of interesting basically. So yeah, I want to basically incorporate that into the story, so there it is basically right there. And it's probably worth noting, by the way, these like, you know, italicized like, you know, paragraphs that basically I have up here, they're not really part of the story, they're sort of like this like, you know, related to them. And part of the reason I basically highlight these italicized like, you know, paragraphs is to sort of like, you know, shed more lore light basically on like, you know, the aspects of the game. So that's basically why like, you know, I highlight these italicized like, text basically like this, because it does that like it does just that basically. It's like, you know, tells you about the game more. So yeah. Alright, so let's get into this one proper. It was at that point in the battle that I knew we had won. The bone giants that remained still proved to be quite a threat, but with enough overwhelming force, we eventually got through their defenses and defeated them. As the last of the undead were felled, the defenders began to break into another victory cheer. I was able to join them, but I noticed the bright glow of another healing spell enveloping me once more. Turning around, I noticed that a spell was being cast by one of the healers this time. Get Fay healed as quickly as possible, Doctor. I want her back in peak form as fast as possible. Hearing my name, I wondered just who the Shaloran was, as a few in Elvala knew my name. As the Shaloran took off his helmet, I immediately would come to recognize Aaron Gwell's face. Speaking quickly to me, he stated, We will be exiting through the shroud to see if we can catch whoever was responsible for this attack. Judging how the undead were acting, it is likely that whoever sent these attacks must be nearby. Registering his words, I silently nodded to him, after which he proceeded to put back on his helmet and look out towards the direction of the shroud. When the healing spell is finished, Aaron directed the healer to get to wounded healing grounds before holding out his hand in my direction. Readying myself, I took a deep breath and took his hand. In an instant, Aaron cast a spell to teleport us to the other side of the shroud. Taking a moment to get my bearings, it didn't take long for us to notice the retreating undead group, or the lone cloaked figure moving among them. I didn't have much time to glimpse at my surroundings before Aaron motioned me to follow. Keeping a good distance, we shot the undead as we followed them to the northwest. For a couple days, we traveled just west of the Nargal borders, passing many destroyed settlements which showed signs of being recently attacked. I had guessed that the Nargals had attempted to reclaim these settlements, only for them to be attacked and their inhabitants to turn into undead thralls, the same of which likely attacked Elvala. After a time, we slowly made our way into another settlement, after the undead force, only to notice them stop therein. Nearing the edge of one of the buildings to catch a glimpse of what they were doing, we spied a cloaked figure nearing a well. Out from one of the buildings, a couple of skeletons emerged, carrying some food on a plate. Whispering in a hushed voice, Aaron quickly stated, "It appears, unlike the undead following him, our friend here is alive." As if on cue to Aaron's statement, a low raspy voice spoke from a cloaked figure saying, "Yes, very much alive." Dead silence permeated the air for a long moment after that, apart from the sound of food being eaten by the figure. The entire time this was happening, the undead stood motionless. Sensing that the figure wished to talk, Aaron stepped out in full view, hand on his weapon, but not yet drawn. Seeing Aaron come into view, the figure stated, "Ah! You were the one who was capable of crushing my creations in one blow. I must say, I wasn't expecting someone to be capable of that. Well done! Although, your abilities in stealth are perhaps not as notable." At that moment, Aaron drew his sword, and stood at the ready with it stating, "I'd very much like to crush the creator as well." To this, a raspy laugh escaped from the cloaked figure before a hand appeared and motioned toward Aaron to try. Without hesitation, Aaron immediately began to charge forward. Reacting to some movement, the undead quickly moved to form a defensive line and block Aaron's approach. Consisting mostly of maces and archers at this point, they laid down a volley of projectiles and magic in Aaron's direction. In a mere instant, Aaron teleported themselves next to the cloaked figure, avoiding it all entirely. Reacting to this, the cloaked figure produced a spear of productive magical energy to meet Aaron's attack. Tightly gripping his sword with both his hands, Aaron raises it above his head and brought it down in a powerful swing. After that, I'm not sure as to what happened, as a bright flash shot forward as the two powerful commands clashed. I'm not entirely sure of what had happened, but what I do know is that there was an explosion of energy that erupted between Aaron and the Necromancer, creating a shockwave that ripped through the remnants of the settlement. Finding myself within one of the buildings, I stumbled to my feet and attempted to reorient myself. When I was able to, I made my way out to the hole in the wall, and I had been thrown through to survey what had happened outside. Looking around, all I could see was a scene of destruction, as torn ground, ruined buildings, and charred air remained. Stepping out from the building, my foot crushed one of my sharp bones that now lay strewn about the battlefield. This would unfortunately be noticed by several skeletons that survived the blast. When they raised their weapons in my general direction, I knew I needed to act quickly. I approached a couple of closer ones and deftly broke into them pieces with a couple well-placed strikes. I was about to charge toward the rest, but then I noticed a couple of skeletons raising staves in my direction. Rapidly, I dove behind the rubble of a nearby building and hid from the barrage of magic that lit up the space I had just been in. Getting to my feet and holding my weapon tightly, I could hear them advancing toward my position. I readied myself and waited for the skeletons to come closer, and watched for the moment when they would appear around the corner. Alright, so basically, like, you know, this is sort of like, you know, turning into like a Necromancer type of battle here, where basically, like, you know, see like Fay and like Aaron basically confronting the like Necromancer responsible for the attack on Elvala. And for those who basically, like, you know about the rest of the lore basically in the game, obviously, Necromancers basically, like, you know, were out and about during like this time, like attacking, like, you know, the various summits all around. And the idea of like this piece of lore here is basically sort of like, you know, covered this sort of like, you know, aspect of like, the game. So we don't know who this Necromancer basically is. I sort of imagine it could have been like, say, Core basically back in like his prime, sort of like attacking people. But basically, this Necromancer here is basically one of those, like, you know, ne'er-do-wells who are basically, like, you know, something like massive, like, you know, undead armies to, like, you know, attack the village sides and, like, you know, eventually, as you can see, attack Elvala itself. So not even Elvala is basically like immune from like the undead attacks that basically are, like, you know, going around here. And, you know, we can also see that this, like, you know, this particular Necromancer is pretty powerful as well, because Aaron basically, like, goes to, like, attack the Necromancer, and he doesn't immediately go down in, like, a first swing, so he's a lot stronger than, like, you know, the average Necromancer, so to speak. But anyhow, that's basically gonna be the first chapter, or first 4 chapters here for, like, you know, this, like, final book here. And I think, like, you know, these are like the first, like, the, you know, the best chapters of this book here, because they basically sort of like lay out, like, you know, like the main, like, crux of what this, like, you know, this, like, book is basically all about is, like, showing off, like, you know, the lore basically, like, you know, what's with these skeletons and Necromancers, like, running around, like, all over the place. So the next, like, 4 chapters are gonna be, like, you know, the confrontation with Necromancer, and there is some, like, you know, good basically, like, you know, get out of it, but we'll get to that, like, in the next video. So we'll leave it here. And we'll cover that next time. But for now, take care.